Point out that the flowers on the altar are in honor of Nancy Clace's 75th birthday, which is today. Oh, to be young again. In the very beginning of her book, Florence Scovel Shinn says, the name of the book is The Game of Life and How to Play It. She said, most people believe that life is a battle, that we struggle with life and life is hard and life is a battle. And she said, the truth is that life is a game. And the game is giving and receiving. It's as simple as that. Giving and receiving. So the game of life is giving and receiving. She goes on to say that the way we successfully play the game of life is with our knowledge of spiritual law. So what she's really saying is when we choose to engage spiritual law, when we choose to employ spiritual law, we actually ratchet our consciousness up from what appears to be to the truth of what is. So when we invoke God's omniscience, when we invoke God's omnipotence, when we invoke all that God is into our life, into the game of giving and receiving, then we win. Then we win. So in about a minute and a half, I've covered all we really need to know about life, which is number one, life is a game. The game of life is giving and receiving. Number two, playing the game successfully requires the knowledge of spiritual law. And number three, application of spiritual law is important because it ratchets our consciousness from lowercase all that is, what we can sense, to uppercase all that is. So we can have a greater awareness and an experience of the divine. There's a story in Hebrew scriptures. And the story goes like this. There was a prophet named Elijah, and Elijah brought drought on the land ruled by King Ahab. Now, why God would ask Elijah to do that is not the point of the story. But the point is that drought came to the land and affected everything that no longer grew. It was barren. The land became more and more barren, and the people suffered. No rain fell. Okay, so maybe why God did this is just a little important. Why God did this is because the people had forgotten their oneness with God. They had forgotten their oneness with Source. They had forgotten about their faith in God. And Elijah had come to tell them with his words. But his words fell on deaf ears and closed minds and hard hearts. So that's why they had drought on the land. With deaf ears, closed minds, and hard hearts, the people believed that they could only believe in what they saw. So in other words, their belief was if they weren't receiving anything from the land or from God, then they were no longer prosperous. And if they were no longer receiving God's goodness and they were no longer prosperous, then surely they would perish. So you see how this becomes a downward spiral. Metaphysically speaking, and taking into account the deaf ears, closed mind, and the hard heart of the people, do you think that Elijah created the drought all by himself?
No.
And no. Okay. So the story continues. Elijah was inspired to move out to the Wadi of Cherith. A wadi is a brook or a small stream. The Wadi of Cherith flowed into the river Jordan. There, Elijah was able to find water to drink to sustain him. Additionally, ravens brought him food every day. But the drought got worse, and the drought got worse. And eventually the wadi dried up, and Elijah was opened up to a new inspiration. God told Elijah to go to the city of Zarephath, where he would meet a widow who would provide for him. Now, before we continue, let's get some fundamental metaphysical interpretation under our belts. Let's do it. What? Yeah, yep, come back. Here we go. One more. Very gentle today. Okay, so Elijah represents the I am consciousness. The people represent the random, ungoverned thoughts. The drought is the lack of nourishment or enrichment of man's thoughts. Zarephath is a place of refinement and purification. Now, the thing about metaphysical interpretation of any story is that we're all the parts, we're all the people, we're all the events, and we're all the places. So inside of us, there's an Elijah. Inside of us, we have that I am consciousness. Inside of us, we have random thoughts. And if we don't spend enough time in meditation, practicing meditation, our thoughts become random and rampant, and they start to take off and assume a life of their own, and pretty soon they've started that deadly downward spiral so that they don't see any nourishment, they're not available to take in any enrichment, and pretty soon they know they're going to perish. But the good news is that inside of us, there's a place we can go. There's an experience that we can have that brings refinement and purification of our thoughts. You with me? Yes, okay, good. So, off to Zarephath goes Elijah to find the widow who will feed him. Elijah encounters the widow right there at the city gates. She is collecting sticks of wood to build a cook fire. Elijah says, "Please feed me." And the widow's response is classic. "As God is my witness." She doesn't really say, "As God is my witness," but she has her hand up and she says, "As Jehovah thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but a handful of meal in the jar and a little oil in the cruse. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, and that we may eat it and we may die." But isn't it happen sometimes when you think, hey, what? I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to take care of myself, and I'm going to do everything and enjoy every life, all that I can, and then I'm going to die. Not you, Nancy, because you're 75 and it's your birthday. Okay, but sometimes can you see, I don't even ask if you think that widow person is familiar to you. Because metaphysically, actually, she's not so bad. Metaphysically, the widow just represents half of the truth. She represents half of a pear. Wisdom and love go together. The widow represents love. Giving and receiving go together. The widow represents the receiving. Now, all by herself, she's not able to thrive because she's too focused on receiving. She was used to somebody else bringing that meal to her. I know, nobody's moving but me. I'm sorry. Crackle, crackle. But nobody else was bringing that meal to her. Nobody else is now bringing her that oil. She feels like half of her is missing. And with Elijah coming in, things can be different. I know, he's not moving either.
No.
So, let's see. Elijah says, "Fear not, make and give me a little cake first, and the jar of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail until the day that Jehovah sendeth rain upon the earth." In other words, he's inviting the widow in her willingness to give and willingness to share, to participate in spiritual walk. He's inviting her to not only think of herself as a receiver, but to think of herself as a giver. And in this very act, we find the key to prosperous living. We find the key to unlocking those thoughts that we have stored and setting them free, releasing them and letting them go, and inviting ourselves into a full experience of our prosperity by giving, because prosperity's demonstration doesn't come in the receiving, it comes in the giving. Unity writer Imelda Shanklin says this. She says this. Right on. It is not our possessions, but essentially our spirit toward our possessions that makes us rich or poor. The widow learned that sharing precedes replenishment. She shared. She treated her supply as constant, and her supply became constant. So step number one, if we want to embody prosperity's demonstration, is keep the supply in circulation. Not to hoard it, but to put it out there in the world. And number two, to treat that supply as if it's continuous in nature. To expect it to be replenished. Okay, see? That was not me. I was not moving right at that moment. Okay. But what this reminds me of is what Jesus said in Luke 6:38. Give, and it will be given to you. Give, and it will be given to you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. I always wondered what that pressed down, shaken together, and running over meant. But here's what it means. In the time of Jesus, when you went to a market, you didn't buy things based on weight. You bought it based on bulk. So you would go and you'd say, I want a bushel of lemons or a bushel of tomatoes, and you would hope that the bushel, all the lemons or tomatoes would be packed in there. If you went to buy a sack of grain, you would hope that they would actually press down the grain, shake it so that there was no more space inside, and even be running over. Like that would be a really good day at the market when it was pressed down, shaken together, and running over. So here's how I learned this verse. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You know what's coming next. Here we go. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You're getting it. One more time. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over. So it goes, give, and it will come back to you. Give, and it will come back to you. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over. That's how it works. Isn't that great? That's how the game of life works. Prosperity's demonstration is in giving. So let's talk about giving. Jim Roseberry, in his book, Even Mystics Have Bills to Pay, outlines 5 levels of giving. And they're like levels of consciousness in giving. Stage 1 is that we don't give. We don't give. And we're justified in this. We're totally justified. You know, I don't have a lot, so I'm not going to give. Or I don't like who I would be giving to, so I'm not going to give. It's just a stage of consciousness. Number 2 is we give as little as possible. Well, you know, I don't have a lot, so I'm only going to give a little. Or I'm going to give a little now, but I'll give more later. And you know, all those justifications are actually arguable. They're arguable because in the moment you're just giving a little. Jim Roseberry says this level of consciousness is really about values. He says people equate giving with spending, and they want something to show for it. So people are more willing to spend money on a night out or money on a nice vacation than they are to give. It is not the same thing. Stage number 3 is we give out of a sense of duty. Except for Nancy, this is true about birthdays. You know, I should go get a present. Like Christmas, I should go buy a present, or I have to buy a present. And some people in the shoulds and the have-tos can be incredibly generous. But there's not very much joy when it's a should or a have to. Step 4 is when we actually know the law. We know that at what we sow, we actually reap. And we give in order to receive. And this is a very dicey stage of consciousness. Because we know the law, we have to be hypervigilant. Because we know the law, we can work it in an unenlightened way. We can say, I'm giving to get. I'm giving to get that payoff. I'm giving to get that payoff, or I'm giving to get that payoff. And again, there's not a whole lot of joy in giving to get, because that's not really giving. And then there's number 5, yay, because we give. It's our true nature. It's who and what we are. We're born to be generous. We're born to be alive. We're born to give. It makes us happy. There's nothing happier when it's spontaneous. And I just think of Oprah and I feel happy. You know how she gives. This is like stage 5 giving. It's awesome. It's where our full aliveness is. It's where we're pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Is it not? It's in stage 5 that we realize and we remember our faith in God. It's in stage 5 where we realize and remember our oneness with Source. It's in stage 5 where we actually probably don't think much about the law of continuation. We give knowing that our supply is always replenished. So what stage are you in? Yeah, all of them. All of them. You know, it just kind of depends on where we're standing in any given moment. Metaphysically, we're all of these stages. But our conscious choice can be to be in stage 5 in that natural state of giving more and more often. Give and it will come back to you. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over. So the next line goes, give and it will come back to you. When you give to the Lord. And metaphysically, Lord, anytime you see Lord, L-O-R-D, you can put law, L-A-W. See, I wasn't even moving then either. But it was clearly, crackly important. You can put the word law. So when we engage in giving, when we demonstrate our prosperity by giving, we're actually giving and we're playing with the law. So let's do the whole chorus. Give and it will come back to you. Shake down, shake together, run it over. Give and it will come back to you. When you give to the Lord. And if we ever find ourselves in another place, if we ever find ourselves in another consciousness, if all of a sudden we realize, oh my goodness, my widow is overactive, or my people have run amok, or I'm just realizing I haven't meditated enough, we can go to our Zarephath. We can go to that place of meditation. We can go to that place of purification. We can come to this place of refinement. So let's sing Have Your Way as we come into a time of meditation.